Archana has served as the CMO of Airtable, a low-code app platform. I'm sure a lot of you use it in developing your product since March 2020. Has also served on the board of director of MongoDB since 2019. She's on board of directors of Zendesk. And more importantly, I personally met Rachna about 5, 6 years back when I went to Silicon Valley, and I heard what Atlassian is doing, which is actually all product-led growth. And she led their marketing and data science and growth at Atlassian since 2013. So she has lots of insights, what went wrong, what went right, and we're going to unveil some of them in discussion today. So with that, welcome once again, Rachna, and we'll start the conversation. And we will, so you were saying something, Rachna?
No, all good. Thank you.
So with that, I think I'm going to start, with early days of Airtable, because that's most relevant to the audience here, because a lot of them are sub 1 million or starting up just now. Do you really recall, how did they define their early customer profile while they were building the product? What are the core problems they're trying to solve, especially when you are tooling for a specific set of users, right? So how do you think about the ideal customer profile?
Yeah. In that regard, Airtable's fairly unique because at least when I was even at Atlassian, we'd have a point of view on this as a particular kind of a developer or a particular kind of person from IT. Airtable set out with the mission to help, the knowledge worker, the person on the front lines trying to run complex processes, the person stuck in spreadsheets and dealing with multiple workflows, trying to help them build applications. It decided that, what could possibly happen? Like, how could we transform the workplace if the person who normally uses software actually is allowed to create software? And to change that paradigm and the way of thinking, the idea was to effectively go after the business user and not think about a particular vertical or a particular use case, but be like as intentionally as possible, be as horizontal as they could, knowing that we weren't actually building for, I don't know, the CIO or the CFO or the CPO. We were actually building for all of us that try to, as working and building new processes in companies and trying to get work done, work through workflows. And that was really the mentality with which the product itself started being created, is maybe taking the power that had so long been in locked in development teams and trying to take that a little bit more horizontally through the organization.
And so how was there a lot of iterations they have to do to really come upon stage where they knew it's going to work? So what really made them? How do you realize that it's now going to work, right? Because when you start something as horizontal as saying I'm going to create an absolute horizontal product, not keeping a particular persona or a customer profile in mind to large extent. So how do you then come to a stage where you're saying, okay, this is why I'm going to spend time on, and I'm going to go towards product market fit through this?
Yeah. So two things. One is the very fact that that the company at that time decided, hey, we're going to enable the business user. Then by definition, it had to be product-led growth, right? It had to be something that someone could come and try and buy. It had to be just that simple, that a business user felt enabled and empowered to use the software. So that was sort of like the first inclination to turn around and say, we're just going to open sort of the pathways into the product, and then understand and learn and deeply become customer centric to figure out how people are using this product. So the early iterations of the product effectively said, if you're using a spreadsheet for anything other than number crunching, then you should use it. You should use Airtable because it looks like a spreadsheet, it acts like a spreadsheet, but it's actually powered by a relational database. And if you think about any application at the core of it, having a relational database, some interface, some logic on top of it, then we're on the mission to consumerize all of these layers, right? So we can invite any use case that any application would use, and then study it deeply. So initial use cases were across the board, right? Lots of different things, a lot of consumer use cases as well. people that are trying to do personal stuff organizing. Think about it as a high power. Pinterest was also one of the use cases that they saw, but they also saw adoption in teams and in the workplace. And I think that came early enough that it was in my mind, when I think about a number of other companies that have started with the consumer slash prosumer slash business case, it has taken them some time to perhaps optimize for one particular kind of use case. In Airtable's case, they saw a lot of viral growth in the business teams and were able to quickly say, all right, that's what we're going to try to optimize for. And we're able to turn and say, it's not the consumer use case, which by the way has worked wonders in many B2B companies, right? In Atlassian, Trello is part of Atlassian now, and that's how we think. People start using Trello on personal use cases and eventually bring it into the workplace. There's been Dropbox, there's been Evernote, there's been so many examples of that, of companies that have done very well. But Airtable was able to quickly say, we're going to actually prioritize the business use case, because the virality that we're seeing as teams come on board is something we want to optimize for.
So what kind of adoption? How do you know this adoption is good enough for me to say press the green button and say yes, this is what it is?
Lots of product love. When you talk to your customers and they absolutely love using the product, and I'm sure we'll talk about these themes through the conversation, but the product obsession that you actually see customers want to use it, there's a lot of inbound. When you're starting off the product, sometimes you don't even have the commercial systems to take a credit card and even like actually complete a transaction and deal with the expansion use cases or cross team use cases. And so there are a lot of what you call hand raisers that are, hey, can you help me do this? I want to actually use it for this purpose and I'm unable to. And so as many small companies will, in the early days, all the leaders on the front lines of actually hearing a lot of that feedback. And when you start seeing disparate use cases, or in any particular specific, you start seeing expansion within teams, you can actually start seeing organic growth, and you see the word of mouth flywheel starting to find its way, where people come, they're more proactive with their questions, with their use of the product, with their feedback, with actually their kind words on different networks like social networks, etc. And then you're like, all right, I've got this. I need to be able to both respond to their needs, but also fuel much more of that.
So, and like in the previous session, we were discussing about, marketing being part of the product, or product marketing being part of the product. So did that combination came into being when you had because you're talking about a complex, I would say symphony of product love versus word of mouth versus virality. So how do you think about that? Is the team sitting together and figuring it out, or the particular roles who try to do that? What has been your experience?
So I've often found that the more, as the company scales, each one of these functions becomes much more solidified with very like specific roles and responsibilities, right? Right now at Airtable, we have a product marketing team that's distinct from the product team. In the early days, it's very horizontal in its approach, because you have to actually both talk to the customer, understand what they're saying, help with the positioning that way, help the product roadmap. And so I don't want to say that in itself becomes a very horizontal skill. And perhaps one of the reasons why in product-led growth companies, I find that marketing teams and product teams are anyways joined at the hip for being able to drive those results. But over time, as you mature, then yes, I personally always seen product marketing at the helm of product, of the marketing team itself. And it's almost sort of the API, if you want to think about it that way, between the product team, the sales team, and all of the customer facing teams. It is always at the junction of listening to a lot of customer feedback and working hand in hand with product to both craft that roadmap and the narrative together before being able to position it and take it to the world. And I think so even in Atlassian or at Airtable, the relationship between product marketing and product is an extremely, extremely close one.
And it's interesting you talk about positioning, right? And I would wonder, especially when you talk about Airtable is such a horizontal product. So how did the positioning work in, see if I am going after a particular profile or a use case, it's easier to position, right? You're doing for CFOs, doing for, a help desk or any particular functions, positioning, I would wonder, is a little bit more straightforward. But in case of a horizontal product like Airtable, how do you figure out the positioning?
I will not no mincing words here. It is a challenge for sure, but I think about it as perhaps a strength, if you will, of the company, right? So you can think about horizontal positioning. Some of it I did earlier, which is, hey, it's a consumerization of database. If you're using spreadsheets, you should use this instead. It's relational database. It's powered by consumerization of interfaces and logic. You have automation, so you can consumerize all of that logic. And so you think about that as very horizontal positioning. But you have the luxury to actually do a lot of vertical positioning. It may not be a tightly packaged solution, a turnkey solution, but you can actually go out there and talk about how manufacturing processes run on Airtable. And you can talk about how inventory management can run on Airtable, or video production runs on Airtable. And so when you actually think about it, like from a marketer's point of view, you get to take this very moldable software and you can have so many different entry points then, whether it is through content or paid channels or going to where such niche audiences are. You end up having a lot of different places to come and invite them. It doesn't go without investment, obviously, because if you're telling someone, hey, you can run your video production workflows on Airtable, then you want to take them through a journey that's somewhat it sort of introduces them, whether it's through emails or the screens they see or the templates they see that are related to that, to what they came into the product for, which would be quite different from what someone who's trying to use the product from, say, an inventory management perspective might want to do, right? And so it doesn't go without that investment. So there's a lot of prioritization on still ensuring you're tackling sort of the biggest bang for the buck, if you will, at the get-go. But you can at least try to start serializing and maybe actually use it as an advantage that it is such a horizontal product that you can have horizontal positioning, but you have a lot of vertical positioning that you can do. And if you have a great community of users that love the product, then you can imagine what an amplification that is, because there are so many pockets of that positivity being spread into their circles that it can fuel word of mouth in such an incredible way that a marketer could not actually really think about doing it at that scale.
And so while you are at positioning, it's a careful orchestration of positioning, understanding which vertical flows are working on your horizontal platform. So does the freemium plays any part in adoption in the early stages or habit forming products? So how does that dynamic come into play at the early days?
Huge role in that, right? And I think maybe even Girish mentioned that actually eventually product-led growth can also fuel a lot of human interaction with with the customer, both from a learning perspective, but also from a sales perspective, because once they use the product, there is the ability to grow and adopt it, knowing that it's a freemium product, that they can try it out. Many customers are very, very willing to pay, right? But the time bounded trials sometimes, when there's high complexity, makes it really hard for them to get the aha moment or get the full value before you're like, all right, now give me your credit card. But instead, if you make both transparent pricing so that they have an understanding of, all right, when I do move to full deployment on this particular product, what is it going to cost me? So you go in there with transparent pricing in a way that people can actually afford to be able to buy and try at a large scale, and in that regard, be able to get them along the way. Then the fact that you've started for free allowed them to deliver and consume value, and most people then are very willing to engage in a commercial journey with the company, and then they can understand more easily the value of the paid features to the product. But then you do have to spend the effort in also educating them what the next level of features or the next level of features would get for them.
Yeah, that's where obviously the packaging will also start playing a big role. in that. So at what point in time, so we are going from early iteration to almost going to PMF, right? So at what point in time you really solidify that I've really got a PMF now? Let me now translate into a little bit more of a growth organization or a growth mindset of scaling the organization.
Yeah, I think that I'd say that there are almost two kinds of view, right? Till you don't have product market fit, it's all hands on deck, right? When I'm saying it's like everyone plays this horizontal role. But once you actually realize I have people that are coming in, the engine's moving, it's working, that's when you start, diversifying these teams. So most teams, again, every company is different, but the teams that I've kind of worked on with like have the title of a growth team per se, they're usually focused on the very empirical changes in the funnel that will help eliminate friction, go to the next step, and then the next step, and quick iterations and quick changes in order to deliver value. Versus the product teams are also growth teams, truly. All of their features are being done with the mind that, hey, we have a product-led growth engine, we have to inspire growth. And so like in Airtable, it would be the platform that's being built or the automations that's being built or the APIs that are being opened up so that people can build their own functionality, or the virality through the invites. All of that's being built by the core product teams, but it's being done with the mindset of, all right, how are we going to unlock more and more value and therefore be able to drive more and more growth? So I'd say that both teams work on growth. Even you'll have marketing growth teams, it's all working on growth, but all on different time frames or all on different sort of areas of the funnel in order to be able to reduce friction. That's almost the first part that everyone's thinking about, is let someone get ahead in the journey and then engage them in terms of expansion.
So, you've obviously seen the growth part of Atlassian, now you're doing at Airtable. What are the common mistakes or top three mistakes to avoid at this stage when you are just switching from PMF to moving towards growth and figuring out which features to look at? As you said, right? Marketing is looking at growth team is looking at empirical data, and then you have product teams are looking at features to drive that growth. So what typically goes wrong, or what has gone wrong in your experience?
So the one most common mistake, at least that I found early on in products, but I think as the concepts of good growth practices are going, it's perhaps hopefully becoming less, is the idea of not being able to, or trying to iterate too fast without thinking about the full funnel impact, right? Because it's very easy to get someone to click a button. That's super simple. But then actually getting sure that they actually engage and really trying to understand what is your activation metric. Like at what point can you say the person is using the product? What point can you even say forget using? What if you go one step higher? What point can you say they're poking around and they're genuinely trying to understand how to engage with the product, right? Being able to actually think about drop-offs at that point and saying that is how we're going to think about. So even if I make a tweak on a web page as a marketer, I would not consider that tweak to be anything interesting, because I could have very easily got unqualified traffic to sign up. Not a big deal. Most people can do that, but can I actually get them to truly engage in the product, to know that that tweak actually brought someone into some form of engagement on day one? Did they come back on day two? Excellent. Or day one plus an email, did that bring them back on day two? That's great. And that's how even top of the funnel experiments are turned around and judged. So I think the first thing is having all of the teams align on the same metrics, so that there's a common vocabulary. It seems so simple, but I think like vocabulary is perhaps one of a really hard thing to do in a fast growing company. Everyone has sort of a different term or a different time frame that they're looking at for activity, and so that's a strong one to look at. And then the other aspect is also planning out full funnel experiments. And so, if marketing is positioning the product in a particular way, then the product experience should follow that. And so whether you do that iteratively or otherwise, like both the teams working hand in hand, sharing the same goals, using the same vocabulary becomes imperative.
I understand. I think you picked on the word the aha moment, right? Which I think is one of probably the most difficult things to really understand. And there's a question from Manish. Can you talk about few examples of aha moments within Atlassian or Airtable or both, or other companies that we would refer also. So how do you know this is aha moment, or what are some techniques that you use to come to that?
Yeah, I find it in at least in team-based software, it has been maybe this is an oversimplification, maybe it isn't, but for me, it's also been simple to say, I, as a user, when I invite my team member to actually work with them in the software, I don't care if I've worked in it with it like for last 10 weeks, but now that I've invited somebody, I'm ready to show off this. I have certainly crossed that aha moment, and now it is a team oriented software. People will always poke around. When they don't have the confidence, they won't actually start inviting people, right? So have they actually like when you want to look for signals to say, okay, this person is now really truly engaging with my product, is it team oriented use case? Is it single player mode or multiplayer mode? And you're looking to start getting that multiplayer mode. Now there are a lot of software that work beautifully in single player mode, right? The Dropboxes of the world, as I mentioned, or the Evernotes, they're great even in single player mode. But for the software I've worked on, that has been that's why I said it might be an oversimplification, but that's an easy one to look at. All right, someone's actually willing to bring somebody else along the journey with them, is another one. But otherwise, I'd look for recurring use. Being able to know that the person has been able to at least come more than once. They're engaging. Are they coming yet again and yet again? And so you'd look at those signs of engagement to know. So if it's not showing off the product to their team and inviting them, then it would at least be consistent usage, and you know that they're making the best effort to bring that product as part of their own journey.
I understand. And how does the customer success piece starts coming into being? We spoke about marketing, product, features. Does customer success also start indicating at some point in time during the growth stage, or just before PMF?
I absolutely believe so. So I think it's one of the core teams. In most regards, it's the customer success team that actually works hand in hand with the customer. Sometimes even faces the same frustration that the customer faces in order to get the customer successful. It is the most incredible source of product feedback. Like there just isn't a better one. And so you'd find that marketing teams work very closely with the customer success teams to actually figure out both give feedback to the product, but also what is the confusion that's being caused that we haven't clarified along the way. And so if you look at every time the customer has a problem as an opportunity to say, this is actually a product improvement that we failed at, and that's why the customer is having this problem. Or if they have a confusion, this is a marketing failure. We haven't actually told them what they need to know to make progress. I think customer success plays that role. Support to that extent also certainly does in a large way. But the question is then, do you have well developed and well honed feedback loops? Like how often do your PMs and PMMs sit down with your customer success teams? And how often do you have these ninja customer success teams that go above and beyond and fix the problems for the customers without actually realizing that not everyone will be able to do that, and they need to give that feedback to product, so those paper cuts can be fixed, if you will, or those issues can be fixed. And I think so. I think some of the best companies, what they do is develop those incredible internal feedback loops, which otherwise don't naturally get formed.
You spoke about product love. We spoke about iterations and figuring out from iterative process to PMF. So from your experience of being the early being early in the field of PLG, what are the top three things you would suggest to the startups to look for going from the seed to the PMF stage? What are the top three things which people should take home and write it down and look at it every single day, so they can avoid the mistakes that other companies would have made in the early days of PLG, especially in the valley?
Yeah. So the first thing I think is like there'd be a lot of people sometimes that would come and be like, we're trying to grow exactly the way like Atlassian did it, or something like that. And it's very hard to replicate because it's a confluence of so many different things, right? Whether it is the time the products got into market, or the other products that they integrated well with, or the pricing transparency, whatever else it might be. There might be many, many different things. So I'd say you obviously start with your business model. For some products, PLG is not the right model when they tend to be tops down sales, when they tend to be things that must be adopted by the whole company versus a team by team basis, for example, when value can be demonstrated only with very, very large adoptions, right? So you first start with that, and then obviously your go-to-market models will transition based on your business models. The second is, part of that framework is, can you truly be focused on discoverability? Every feature of your product that you actually truly think drives value, can you focus on the discoverability and the simplicity of that? I often talk about this thing as, how many nouns does your product have? Because the more nouns you have, the more things people have to learn about it, the more things you want to discover. So do you truly feel that you've done a good job of being able to convey that to the market? So can you focus on the discoverability to say they will find value, and the simplicity in which they can do that? The third, I think, thought about is what we kind of spoke about that, but truly, can you be customer obsessed? When you look at your leadership teams, or when you look at your employees, how many of them actually have routine customer interactions? Like, is it part of the job, that's default, something that you do when you go in front of a customer? It's not an easy thing to make part of the company culture, but it's so incredibly invaluable when you have to sit down in their shoes and try to solve the problems that they are trying to solve. And then last but not the least, as you scale, that's going to be impossible to do on an every customer basis, but can you actually make your data infrastructure and be able to use it in a way where it becomes part of the way you think about building your products, or your go to market, or your customer touch points? So can you actually build a data-driven business so that you would get those insights and be able to move quickly on them? Those would be sort of areas that I'd look at: the business model, product discoverability and simplicity, customer obsession, and a data-driven mentality. And each one of those is sort of a muscle. It takes time to build, but I think knowing that that's where you want to go, and prioritizing them, makes a big difference.
Oh, that's very valuable, Archana. So do you see any, you said a very important point at the start, that you somehow can't just replicate everything in a model, because the timing plays a very different role, and how do you start make a different role? So do you see any commonality between Airtable and Atlassian, where you have worked now? How how are they same and how they are different?
Yeah, so I think the one thing that honestly drove me to both companies, and in fact, as a personal story, I joined Atlassian because I was a big fan of Jira and Confluence. I had used it, and so when you think about, when you talk about product love, and you see customers that are that become product obsessed, I actually am a living proof that that does happen, and literally wrote a cold email to the president of the company saying I would like to join and participate in the growth of the company, right? So that is the extent to which, and I make that point only to say that I think that product obsession that comes from within the company, it then actually transfers to outside of the company and into its employee base. The ability of the employee to feel no friction, or when they feel friction, to know that they are taken care of immediately, that totally becomes part of why you get that sort of fan following. And I've seen, at least in both companies, the deep desire and like a determined, very, very crafted sort of strategy to continue focusing on that. Atlassian, as a public company, is obviously so famous for having such a large part of its expense go in product R&D, and an extremely lean and efficient go-to-market model, because a lot of the investment goes back into product, right? And that is the level of commitment that you end up having. So I do believe that both companies, and for that matter, some of, I think, all the best product-led companies have that level of even internal obsession around the product. How do we actually take that to market and feel the pain of the customer as they go through that journey? With respect to differences, then I think Atlassian started obviously much in an earlier stage where it had the sort of first mover advantage in a number of areas that it was working with. It has also a very large portfolio of products, and so there's much more intricacies around different audiences that you're cross-selling and upselling to, and that creates a very complex system. Now, Airtable has different complexities. Obviously, we talked about the horizontal nature of the product and multiple personas, but it is still a single product company. And there's certain amount of simplicity and focus that you can also bring with that. So there are different nuances in the way they approach things as a result of that, just in terms of maturity and the stage of the company itself. But I think that the sort of seed of that is the obsession with the product. And I think that's certainly been a driving factor or the appeal that both the companies have had for me personally.
Right. Oh, thank you very much, Ashna. I think we spoke about churn also, right? Girish and I were talking about handling churn being such an important point. And I have a question here that in Airtable, how do you handle the churn? At some time, assuming they will graduate out of Airtable, right? So how do you handle the churn piece?
So the graduation out of Airtable is sort of our problem to fix, right? We shouldn't take it as if they do, and they would in some cases, but that shouldn't be a granted that someone would graduate out of Airtable. We have companies that have scaled tremendously on the platform and manage entire large instances on Airtable, right? The idea behind it is when you start using the product for one use case, you expand that use case. And an adjacent team that's working next to you that may have sort of as a Venn diagram, have some overlap with you, gets invited into that use case. They see how the product works. They can adopt it and take it into their use case. And so the sort of horizontal nature of the product nevertheless fuels expansion within the company, right? As well. And so it's not about we started using Airtable for one use case and maybe that project got over or whatever else happened and therefore we could stop and that qualifies as churn. To me, that's not a good enough, it's not okay, because our job then is to be able to inspire more and more usage of Airtable. If the idea of the product is horizontal, then we should be able to solve many more problems within that company. And so some part of churn is also working both on expansion in itself and having entire teams dedicated on seeing when people are leaving, why are they leaving, what is the friction, is it pricing friction, or did we not work for that use case, or do they have some specificity that we aren't able to solve and haven't been able to prioritize it, frankly. And I think that's also one of the reasons to focus on the platform and exposing a lot more APIs, because as a horizontal product, there's a lot of times where there's a first mile functionality or last mile functionality that people want in order to be able to complete their workflow. And we need to provide them the tools to be able to do that. So I think it's certainly when you also have a freemium product or even otherwise, churn can certainly be a top of mind issue. It should for everyone, but it's also part of that same customer obsession with going back and trying to understand why is that happening. We do a lot of churn surveys. We do a lot of NPS surveys. When in an NPS survey, a score doesn't meet our desire, we actually get in touch with those users and try to find out where exactly was our failing. How can we actually improve the experience for them? And so there's a lot of proactivity that goes into that as well. And sometimes when people are saying they want to use something, but there's a pricing barrier, then we actually work with them to see, does it fit their use case first? Can we actually ensure that they will find value of it before asking them to pay? So there's a number of ways that you can sort of slice that, but it is about being very intentional, as it is just one of the stages of the funnel that you will have almost an entire team dedicated to at some point.
So you mentioned, so what kind of NPS benchmark do you use? What is the best practice?
So, I mean, it varies by product and by price point, obviously. But the idea simply being is knowing when you turn around is, will people recommend your product? And you will have people that will have it in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and those are excellent products, right? And the idea is to always keep on not only improving it, but also segmenting it. Segmentation tends to be one of the most key things, I think, in product-led growth, is to actually see are users, early tenure users versus people who've been at the product for a long time, people on small instances versus people on big instances, people in small companies versus those on big companies, right? You have to just keep on slicing and dicing it to try to understand where the problems are. And that's not the only tool in the toolkit, right? Because even your support, you're going to start dicing it with that same segmentation to try to get those same learnings. So that's probably another good one that goes alongside with the data-driven mentality that I spoke with you about, which is not only do you have a consistent funnel between the various teams, but you also have a consistent understanding of what are the segments that we're going to look at all of this data by, so that we're able to turn around and take learnings and at least say, all right, this is the group of people that we're going to improve our entire experience for.
I understand. We are fast approaching the end of the session. I would love to continue discussion, but before we go off from this session, what are the few key things that a startup should take care from a GTM perspective? I know you're an expert in GTM, but that's the growth stage where all this come into play in a major way. But during the early stages, would you suggest top three things that one should think about from a GTM perspective in this entire PLG framework?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's always helped me a lot is that sometimes we tend to get very siloed in our own worlds and our own narrative. But the idea of someone in your marketing teams or customer facing teams testing that narrative with customers, with new customers, and seeing how does it actually work with them. Does it resonate? Does it when they use the product, does it appeal in the same way? I think that is an extremely important thing to do, which was it's very easy. You've probably sat through a whole couple weeks of Zoom meetings and like get more involved in getting all of that work done, but going back and trying to say, all right, for not only for the people in my current ecosystem, but the people that I want to attract, does this resonate? And I think doing a lot of that upfront is important. The other thing is uh, I've often found, and I have benefited from, but I have also often found that being able to speak not only about your product feature functionality, but thought leadership in that space, because a lot of the people and the knowledge workers that are trying to use your product are trying to learn about best practices, and they're trying to learn how's the other person doing this exact thing. And so being able to create communities and share stories and have thought leadership best practices, I've not only benefited from that whenever I've used products and I've known that they've provided that kind of support, but also found it extremely beneficial in terms of attracting the right kind of audience and the right mindset of the audience into the product, but also ensuring that they tend to stay successful. And then the last but not the least is, as you do have sales teams and you do have human touch teams, ensure the close connective tissue, especially like between product marketing and sales. That's again, those are again areas that are very easy to get siloed. But if you can somehow figure out how to create the one team mentality, which is quite easy actually with shared goals around the product, but if you do that, you'll actually ensure the conversations that will help get progress much sooner into the picture.
All right, perfect, Archana. We loved your first interaction with us. I'm sure we will have a lot more sessions with you, especially on the GTM. I would love to explore more on the entire growth piece. Today, I think we are just about time now. So thank you very much
Thank you
for
for
your
having
Friday evening.
Thank you for having me here, and it was such a pleasure to connect with the team.